I'm going to get started in just a moment. So, welcome to tonight's stream. If you're returning, thanks for coming back. Hope we'll have some good chat this evening. We're going to go through software as a service that I'm working on. The service is called College Conductor, and it is a college admissions application that is intended for independent educational consultants to help students keep track of deadlines and that sort of stuff. It's something that I've been building for my wife for a while, and it's a Django and Python application, and it's fairly standard kind of business application. So I think it checks a lot of the boxes of things that you might expect to see in a real world app. So that's a very, very brief idea of what it is. It's all hosted on GitHub. You can go poke at the code if you want under my repository. And tonight, what I plan to do is continue a little bit where I left off last week. So last week, if you joined the stream, what I was trying to do was collect some information from a web scrape. To give a little bit of additional context, there are different kinds of applications that students will submit when they create a college application these days. And there are different groups of schools that have different types of applications. One type of application is called the Common App. This is very standard for a lot of US universities. And what I want College Conductor to be able to do is to have information about the Common App. The Common App website doesn't have any kind of API. So last week what I walked through was how that stuff was scraped and how that information was then translated into something that was stored in a database that could be processed as a backend process to sort of track which schools are there. So where I left off with that, let's bring up the code, is not over here. I did not in advance set this up, my apologies. So we were going over some tests that were adding schools to track and considering modified schools. And if we look back at the actual set of tasks, which are in this file over here, that is where the stuff is stored. So the plan that I have this evening is to continue on this path. So we walk through a little bit of this of how the web scraping actually does the collection of tasks, and it passes the set of schools, which is really just raw data, off to a handler method object, which is defined over here. And when we went through this handle method, we looked at how to take that raw data and see if it was already in the database or not. And then from that, I was planning to send a report off, and we ran out of time. And that's I think where I want to pick up, is to say which of the schools get reported back, and how does that email actually happen, and testing that out. This is, I guess I should preface this. This is not like meant to be a actual like customer email. This is really meant to be a back-end thing. It will notify me, frankly, as the recipient, and just give a report of here's what I need to go look at to make sure that the data is what I would expect. And when I left it, there was absolutely none of the actual data tracking, and that's what we need to add. So looking at this code. Hold on a second. I thought that I'd made a change after the code was done, but maybe I didn't actually do that. Nope. Okay. If you joined the stream last time, I got to this part of where I was doing some processing, and when I wanted to either consider a school to be added or modified, I was trying to use one of Django's methods called update or get, I believe it is. And it wasn't working. And what update or get does is it queries the database and sees if it can find a record. And if it can't find the record, it will go ahead and create that with the information that you want. So it follows essentially what this pattern is right here. This is written out a little bit more explicitly to say, try and get it based off of the slug field. And if you can, update the name and save it. But if you can't, and the record doesn't exist, go ahead and create a record from the raw data that we have from the web scrape. So that was the code that I wasn't able to get working last time, was this update or get thing. But in looking back at what happened, I'm actually glad that it left here, because I think what's going to happen is it's going to make it easier to track what stuff was added and what stuff was modified and deleted. Because what I need to do for the email report is put all of those pieces together in one set, and then up in this handle method, after all the schools have been processed, actually send out the email. That's the plan. So I think that's enough context. If you have any questions, the chat is up. I can see it over here. Feel free to ask away. This time is a bit for me to make progress on this SaaS, but also an opportunity for you if you're learning Django or if you're learning Python to ask some questions about things you may not understand. I've been doing Django for a long time. I've built websites that have quite a bit of traffic, and so I think I'm fairly well equipped to answer your question. So let's proceed. As I said, we need to track three things. We need to track add and modified and delete. And what I want the final email report to look like is very straightforward. It's really going to be as simple as a label that says added, and then the name of the school, and the details about it, and then a section that says modified, and a section that says deleted or removed. So in order to make that email possible, I have to have that email collected somewhere. What I think I'm going to do is make that part of this handler class. It's just like a bit of state that it stores. This may not be the ideal way to go, and part of the pros and cons of thinking about a software as a service is considering what's the best design decision versus a more expedient design decision, because you're kind of wrestling with getting stuff done quickly enough that you can get it out there and not have to worry about it and move on to more important tasks, versus making good decisions. For this thing, I think rather than separating it out to having something that is a handler that then passes off as some kind of email reporter or something like that, it should be sufficient for this handler to collect that state and also do the actual reporting, because this is really a back-end simple email. Okay, so let's go through and actually put the data in. So how do I want to do this? I think the way that I'm looking to do this is if I wanted to sketch it out before I write a test, I think what I want is for this handler to have some initial state here. And I think I'll call this state stats. Seems like a reasonable name. And the stats can use lists keyed by very simple things of add, modified, and delete. So, the full sketch of this is, add with an empty list, modify an empty list and delete with an empty list. I think that's kind of, I hope that gives you a sense of what's going to go in here. So when it comes time to actually do the reporting, what I'll do is pull out of the stats the stuff, the schools that, and I'm planning to put schools, or these tracker instances actually is more specific, but they sort of map to schools. I'll take those things and shove them into these lists as I go along, and that will be enough to report on. If you're looking at this code already, I look at this and I see this is maybe not the most efficient way to do this. You could, rather than using a blank structure like this and having to kind of hard code these lists in here, you could also go to the collections standard library package and import default dict. And default dict is kind of what it sounds like. It will let you make a dictionary that will add default values for the key. So another way to write this self stats class would be to say, I want a default dict that uses list as the constructor of what's going to be the values. The reason you'd have to do that, or the reason you might want to do that, is come down here and let's say we find that this is the place where we want to do the removal of, or add the deleted school, and you wanted to do something like this where you append the actual school here, or the tracker. This code's not totally valid, so just think of this kind of notionally. If you didn't do either of the two methods stated up above here, this code on line, 38 would fail. And the reason it would fail is because what is the value at that key, key location is not a list. In fact, it wouldn't exist yet. So yeah, those are two different approaches for making a dictionary that has some lists already in it. I think because I know exactly which keys I want for this, I'm going to stick to this kind of simplified version. I think it'll work well enough. If I had a lot of keys that were going to be either dynamically defined by some data that I was putting in, or something of that nature, then it might make more sense to use that default dict, so that when stuff is added, it would just create that list right at the time that the dictionary was set. So again, I'm using, if you weren't with us last time, I'm using a tool called Black, which is an automatic formatting tool, and it did that formatting. So Black likes to try and keep things on one line if it can. Not my preferred style in this scenario, but it works. It's easier to not think about the style and just let Black do its thing. So this is what I want to have in my stuff. And so now we need to make sure that the stats get updated with these tracker instances as things get processed. So the easiest way to do that, I think, is to say in this test, this is one of the existing tests, it still works good. I'm going to add to this test. Some people would say don't add multiple assertions to an individual test. I think that is valid a lot of times, but sometimes it's just easier to have a setup once and kind of assert a bunch of things at once. I'm going to take that tact here, and we're going to assert that what are we going to assert? What should we assert? Let's refactor this a bit. So previously I was checking that one of these tracker instances got created, and we're going to do that in a different manner. I'm going to be kind of presumptuous here and say that instead of doing a filter, I know that the database has been cleared out. So what will happen is if this didn't work, this code didn't create a tracker, we'd get not an assertion failure, it would be an actual error, because it would say commonapptracker does not exist. But it's kind of equivalent for doing existence. And I need to have that tracker for the next assertion I want to do, so I feel okay with it. But what I really want to do is I want to assert that what is it exactly? Let me type this out and stop talking for a minute because I think it might be easier. Yes. So I want to assert that the handler is the stats for the add is equivalent to what I've put on the left-hand side there. Because we're only processing one school, it will only be a list of length 1. And it will have in it that tracker that was just created. So this test should now fail. And it does, because the thing that we expected is not what the actual data is. That's how we can read this. And I get confused. I confuse myself of, we're going to put expected stuff on the left-hand side and the actual stuff on the right-hand side. This is something I commented on last week, is that Python's not super clear about this when you're using the standard library of what is expected and actual. They're interchangeable. I like to try and be consistent, so I went to a different test case and looked how I did it elsewhere, and it seems that the way I've been doing it for this project is to have expected on the left-hand side. Okay, so our test is now, I think, valid, and we're going to come down to the bottom here, and when you call create, you get the instance back. I believe it's just the instance. Yes, that seems right. And so now that we have that tracker, really all I plan to do is take the stats and take add and append the tracker. Okay. We test it. Boom. It passed. Okay. So we have the add of our add, modify, delete scenario fixed up. And now we're ready to move on to the modify case. This time I have the same kind of thing, that same sort of pattern as the previous one. And I guess to be consistent with naming, consistency is a good thing, I think. Let's rename this to not just be tracker, but commonapptracker. So this time I already have the advantage that commonapptracker, I did a get on it, and then was doing an assertion on that thing. So we can also just check that the list for modified is going to be similar to what's above. And we've got, I called the key modify, right? Add, modify, and delete. That's usually how I think about it. Okay. And it fails, which is exactly what we'd expect, because we haven't gone over here and modified the code to do this. But we can do, again, I'm being bad with naming over here, so we'll clean this up first. This could be commonapptracker. Like that. And now that the names are the same, I'm going to come up here and change this to modify. And now our test passes. Okay, so that's 2 of the 3 sets of stats. Notice that I left this as a comment up here for last time. This is because this is where we stopped, and what we can do. So this logic was different for what needs to happen. It's not processing one at a time. It is actually the opposite of that. Of if the school does not show up in the raw data but is in the database, we need to like use the existing stuff in the database. And so this is actually, in a way, it's different. We don't need to do an append, but what we do need to do is say that, well, maybe we should write the test first. So we have, did I not write a removed test? So we need to check, what is it exactly that we need to check? We need to check call handle and pass in, okay, all right, let's write the test. So in order to test this remove scenario, we have to have something in our database. So we're going to test tracker removed, and we have this kind of standard setup. So we're going to say a tracker that no longer appears in the raw data is marked removed. Okay. And yeah. So in order to do that setup, I need to create a commonapptracker instance using the factory. So again, this is using Factory Boy, which is a nice tool to make instances of Django database models. It basically adds something to your database with some reasonable defaults, and you can tweak it as necessary, but if you just need an instance, there you go, it's got an instance. So the presence of any instance is fine, and we want to say common app schools. This is going to be the raw data that would have come from the parse of the scraper, and I'm going to, just for simplicity, say that it's empty. That should be sufficient to test this. We're going to have our handler is the common app handler, like that, and invoke our handler with a handle method and give it the common app schools. If I can get my thing to go. Okay, so now I think what I really want to assert is this is a common app tracker instance, because we're going to use that. And at the end, I'm going to assert that, what am I going to assert? That, just like the others, that there's a list of common app trackers, like that, and that will be in the stats delete key. Okay. This should fail if I run it. Oops, especially because I don't have state, I have stats. And I'm calling it on self, so that's not going to work. It needs to be on the handler. Okay, now we're at a real test failure that we expect. And so where I'm at with this is this is a query set, this newly removed trackers, and I'm going to put it into the stats. And I'm going to, since the logic for this is a little different, we don't have to do, we don't have to append anything. Instead, what we're going to do is just go into the stats, and we're going to replace the list. Technically, if you look up that line 22 lines above, I didn't really need to set that delete there. It's almost acting as documentation in that case, because what I'm really going to do is this. I'm going to say, I'm going to take the query set that comes back and make a list out of it. You can't just make a list, or I can't just shove it into this stats here. Maybe I could, but I kind of want it to evaluate to a list because it makes testing easier. Because otherwise, when I run this test over here, it's going to do a query set which would look like a list, but it's not really a list. It's an iterable thing, but it's not quite the same as a standard Python list. So by adding this this cast step, you force the evaluation in the Django ORM, and you actually get the result, and you can store it in here. So now, great. Now it's all hunky-dory. So now we're at this point where we can move on to the actual email. The email, as I said, is going to be just really very simplistic. Here's the add stuff, here's the modified stuff, and here's the remove stuff, and maybe some links, but we might not even need that much. So let's look at that. We've got the to-do that we can remove, and essentially we want to do the reporting after this step right here, and we can call it, let's just make it up for now. I don't know, report. It doesn't really matter. So this is going to be the method that gets called once everything is done. And I'm looking at this now, and I'm not actually sure I'm crazy about this, because this won't matter in practice, but I think it's what I've done is something that's sort of bad design. I am assigning in the init, creating this stats dictionary, and I'm attaching it to self. The problem is the way that I'm invoking this in the task is I'm creating one instance. And as I said, this is going to be something that runs as a once a week thing, so it really wouldn't matter. But it's creating, the stats will be attached to that as state. So actually maybe it would matter, because think about this. I've attached this to self. This will now mean that, commonapphandler.stats will be a thing. This code makes no sense. I'm just typing this out so you can see it. But it's stored in the module level. So what that would mean is that the second week where this is added, I would get a very confusing email, because it's going to go through and process all this stuff again. And for the add and modify, it's going to try and append stuff. And there may be nothing that changed, but the stuff will still be in memory from the previous run. So it would send me another email that would include a bunch of junk. So, oops, that was not good. So how am I going to get around this? One way to do this is to kind of ditch this altogether, because I want to treat this almost as like a fancy function in some ways. Like I don't really want to attach data to self, which, yeah, that's the way I'm going to go. So now by doing that, all my tests are going to fail, because it's not going to know what stats is. Okay, that's totally expected. So I think what I'm going to do instead, actually before I do that, let's just keep this line of code, and then we will move it down here. And rather than attach it to self, I'm just going to have stats be like this. And I'm going to, yeah, it's going to take a little finagling. What I'm going to do is take the stats data and actually inject it into the different functions that are in here, or the methods that are in here, so that what is worked on is not data that's attached to the instance, but is just a dictionary that gets passed in. And that should help with the reporting actually later on. So let's delete this. Now that gets the stats, but the question is, how do we look at the stats? How over here where I've got this removed, like I won't be able to do handler.stats anymore. That's just not a thing. So we have to be able to get to that. And I think the way that I'm going to do it is by looking at kind of spying on report. Because report needs the stats in order to send the email. That's where the email is going to happen from. And so over here, where I have the actual method, I'm going to do an object patch like I did up top here. We're going to say that instead of patching the process school method, we're going to patch the report method. Okay? And so what that leads to is this. So that's a magic mock. And I'm using the mock library. If you have not used it before, it's a way to, because Python is so dynamic, it can swap out different parts of different classes or functions or all sorts of stuff right at that time. And it's super useful. And what it does is anytime it gets called, it rather than invoking the real thing, which in our future case is going to be this reporting, it's email reporting, it's just going to collect what it was called with. And so I'm going to take that data and try and pull out the stats from this parameter that gets called over here with handle. So I'm going to say stats, and here's where mock always trips me up. So mock has this thing called call args, and call args is the data structure that tracks everything that was called, and you can index into it like a tuple, but I never quite know the right way to do that indexing. So instead, I'm going to let this fail, and I'm going to print it out. Okay, this is my brute force way, and this is the nice part of having a very quick test cycle, is I can see very quickly, I hope, common app handler does not have an attribute report. Well, I messed up something. Oh, I didn't define the report method yet. Okay. So it does need to be able to attach to something that is supposed to exist. So we will create this report method and say send the email. And this is going to be a dict. Well, that's fine enough for the type hint for now. No, let's change it to what it's actually going to be. So it's a dict with a stir list, and I need to import that from the typing module. Okay, so this is going to be the interface that we expect for this report method. Okay, so now that that exists, it should fail in a different way, and it should print out. So this line right here, if you notice, looks kind of interesting. Like it's the, I don't know if it's the repr, but it's the stir method on whatever this mock object is, this call. And we can actually, the curious part about it is that you can kind of go into that. So if I say, over here, if I actually take this and I say call args 0. Try this again. You'll see now I'm at the tuple. So what happens in the mock call, that object, is it stores two basic categories of things. It may store more, but this is the most relevant things. It stores the positional arguments, and if you had any keyword arguments, it will store those. And that's, I think, what gets indexed at either 0 or 1. So by indexing into 0, you're saying, give me the positional arguments. And now I'm going to do it once more and take the first positional argument, like so, which should be just straight up the stats data structure. And good. That's exactly what it is. It's got the add, it's got the modify, it's got the delete with the instance in there and the test passes. So that's kind of a cheap way that I use sometimes to prove to myself that I remember how to get the arguments out of a mock. So we've mocked this to get the stats out, but we still have failing test, I believe. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is go up to these. The difference here is what we really want is to say, I want this thing to just be stats. And what I'm going to do is add an extra parameter onto the process school thing. And it's going to be our stats. And that's going to have the same signature as the other thing, which is it's a dictionary keyed by strings, and the values are lists. Oh, that's not valid MyPy. I'm sorry. So just a list. So I could say, so it's really a list of common app tracker instances, like that. So that's the real type thing. Okay. So that's really what's going in here. And then that'll allow us to do the processing. It'll allow us to delete the self here and here, so that it will be sort of correct. But this is still broken. It's still broken in a couple of ways, because now if we come up here, well, I mocked out process school, so that's not technically true. But this needs to receive the stats. That's what it wasn't doing before. And over here, this should fail, because it's going to say you're missing an argument. You only give it one, but it also expects to have stats. So I'm going to give it a stats, and for the simplicity of this test, all I really care about is that it matches the interface that it expects, which is to say stats of an add. And take that out there. Oh, I didn't pass it in. Okay. So we're working through this a little bit more. We'll have a stats here, and that will go there. I think finally, gave it the wrong key name. Okay, tests are passing. So why do I do all this? Like, what's the point? The point, from as far as I can tell, is to give myself confidence that this code is going to work in the future. Because I am an individual working on a SaaS project, and I have an entire suite of unit tests, and my unit tests are the only thing that really proves to me on a regular basis that my code is working as advertised. And when you're when you're building a SaaS product and you're doing it by yourself, you don't have a QA department. You don't have a testing organization specifically doing tests on your stuff. So the burden sort of falls on you that, if you want your app to work, you got to prove that it works. So this is really a safety net, because there are a good number of times where by having tests, I've caught myself from making mistakes that if I had gone out and pushed a deploy out to my website, it would have broken things. So that's the reason that I make these tests, and they might seem a little tedious to make sometimes, and truthfully they are. But I think they do have enough value to merit creating them. Okay, so now we've reached this point where we actually have our all of our statistical data that we plan on sending out in an email, and it's time to actually test the report. And so this is where I will probably start leaning on some documentation a little bit, because I don't remember exactly how to do this. My plan is to make a very simple string that I'll put together and kind of the goofiest way possible. And then I will put it in an email that Django has. Django has a standard email interface, which then I can send for. So let's do that. So we want to test the report. And my report, I don't think I want to mock out anything at all. So we want to say the email report is sent. Okay, that's sort of what we're testing. So let's create our stats. Our stats for this report are going to be add, which is going to be a list. And we can say it's got a commonapptracker instance in it. And we have a modify. We have a delete. And that should be enough. Yeah. So now we have our handler, and we can say handler.handle report. And now we get to the assert. And this is where I'm not really sure how we're going to assert. So let's go to the Django documentation. Well, before we do that, let's look briefly at the base settings. And I was looking at this earlier. So Django has a number of different email backends, and these backends determine how your email will go out. When my code is running on production, I actually use a package called anymail, which is a Django package that kind of wraps around a bunch of different mail services. I chose to use Mailgun as my email sending tool. So, this is clear. This, I hope is clear, is a fake value. This is where the key would go, but I'm not putting the real key in here because this is just testing data. I have the real data is inserted via a different mechanism, which we're not going to go into right now. But it doesn't matter because the emailed backend that I have is this dummy backend. And I think what I need to do is make sure that the dummy backend actually lets me read out the data that's sent to it, so that we can add that to our test and verify that this is working. And that's what I don't know at the moment. So Django dummy backend. Okay. And what I'm looking for is if this is even the right backend. It might be that a better backend to use is a kind of a testing backend. But I'm not really clear at the moment. As you can see, there's a bunch of different kinds of backends here. They all have their purpose. And it may be that the local memory backend is really what we want for testing. Because I might have been scrolling too fast for the Twitch stream to catch that, but if we go down to the local in-memory backend, check this out. So it says the outbox attribute is created when the first message is sent. So what I want to do is essentially read from that outbox and see if it has everything I care about. This might not be the best way to do it, but we'll try. And the dummy backend may not do anything at all. Okay, I don't feel good about that, so here's something else that I do sometimes. I'm not afraid to go to the code, and that's a skill that it would be good if you would develop that. Sometimes the best way to learn about the way something works is by exploring the code itself. So, these paths they align with the actual Django packages. There's nothing super magical about them. So if Django is on GitHub, and if you go to core, and it was mail, and there were backends, and we can look at it. We can just read it and see what it does. Okay. Yeah, this really is very simplistic. It's just doing nothing and returning the length of the list of messages. By comparison, the local memory, the local memory one is adding to this outbox. Okay. So I guess that means that we have to get the outbox, but I actually don't even know what's in the mail message. All right, so let's go over to the, let's take the email backend, and I need to put it in my test settings, probably. I've got this alphabetically ordered just for ease of my purposes, and we're going to change this to local mem. Okay. So now when an email gets sent out, it will go into the mail outbox of Django mail. So in order to test this, let's try it out. Let's see. We want to first assert that the length of the outbox is 0. Like so. And I'm going to get that from Django core mail. That's where we're going to be reading from. So up here, after our standard library imports, we're going to say from Django core import mail. And, oops, this was meant to be a report stats. Okay. And I didn't create, oh, I meant to use the factory, not the actual model. Perfect. So we have no message in our mailbox yet, which is totally what we'd expect. Now I don't know, this strategy is not cleaning up the mailbox, which bothers me a little bit. So if I wrote a second test that would send an email, I actually don't know. I'm not sure that this would work. We might have to clear it out later, but this will work for now because I don't think I have any other tests of emails. But first we need to do is actually send the email. I have an email message elsewhere in the system. I believe it's email message, so let's search for that. Yeah. And I'm just going to be brutal and take this code and steal it. And for now, totally copied. We're gonna need those two. Like that. Okay. Particularly, I'm using format strings, so it can't find these things. I've actually never seen this kind of error message before. It's really cool. I didn't know Python, or I didn't know Vim was smart enough to figure out the variable names in here. But the way this email message works is this first line is going to be the subject, and the second line is the actual body of the message. And so neither of these are valid right now because that was from where I copied them. So let's just say, give it a subject of common app schools processed, or something like that. So that's the first thing, and the second thing is the actual bulk, the body of the email, which I don't want to fill in yet. But by doing this, this should be enough to make the test pass. And it did. So, okay, that tells me that we configured the test environment to use the local memory backend, which is good. And that calling email message and email send is actually working its way through the system and going out through the proper email backend. So that gives me confidence. Now that we have this, let's pull out what I presume is the actual email message from the mail outbox. And it's just a list, and we know the list is 1, so this is a safe thing to do. And I kind of just want to see the type to make sure that I know what I'm working with. And we'll say assert true is false, because sometimes when you run a test and a test passes, it doesn't print out information. I don't know if that's particular to a certain test runner, or maybe that's just a PyTest thing, but it's just a habit I get into. So it is an email message. So I think we'll have everything that we need to inspect it. Let's make sure I know the attributes. So it's got a subject, and there's probably there's the body. So those are the two things that I think are important, and I think we're good. So we can delete that. We're going to say self assert equal, and I want to say that the the subject is right. So email message subject, like that. And just this kind of also gives me confidence that I'm doing this thing properly, because that's an easy check. Okay, so that's one assertion, and then the other assertion for now is this one of checking body. And the nice part about all this is, like, this is what I'm doing for the testing. And because I know, I've run other stuff where I actually have the email setup working, and I'm working through Django's email interface. So I don't have to, I feel comfortable, I'll say, testing this much, testing the content of the email, and proving to myself that it works and it's going to go to the people, the email address that I said it will go to, and that the rest of the system will just do its job. Some people, when they might test, if they didn't have unit tests to help them, and they didn't have confidence in the other parts of the system, what they might end up doing is go through an involved process where they actually will stand up some kind of basic primitive SMTP server that, there's ones that are even baked into Python that you could run locally and just like monitor stuff. And they might actually try and exercise all of this code path to actually send out an email and see if that's the way to go. But because of the power of having a common interface, and because of having swappable email backends, you can get away with this kind of stuff where, I'm just pulling a message out of this outbox for testing purposes, and I know that because the message is the same, it will just do the right thing. So what I really care about is testing the content of this body. That's what's really important, because that's the thing that I'm going to be seeing on the other side when I'm the actual recipient of the email in the production system. So the rest of this exercise is about essentially populating the body with real content. So let's just refactor it quickly to extract it into a variable. And it's still not what it passes, but it's obviously not what we want. It's not the thing. So the format of the email is going to be, what did I say? Added, modified, and deleted. So it's going to look roughly like this, where it's an add. I'm going to add a new line and put a placeholder, or I can just say I can use a format string. So I'm still getting used to format strings. Format strings are a new thing in Python 3.6, and they're awesome. But I've been writing Python code for a long time, and they've not been around, so I'm not used to using them yet. But they're pretty cool. So what I can do is just say, like, fill in the variable that I want to have go here. So added, we'll call this, I'll just leave it as added. That's good enough. And let's put a couple new lines. And now I want the stuff that's going to be modify, and call that modified with a couple more new lines, and delete with a new line, and I'll say deleted. And that is, oops, that's everything. So my, syntax highlighter, or the error checker here, is telling me that those three variables are undefined, which is true. And for now, I'm going to just fill them in with junk. And I'm taking this approach of kind of going slowly at this because I want to build up my test. I'm going to go from failing, or from passing to failing, and passing to failing. It's this red-green cycle of doing TDD, and it's just how TDD, test-driven development, is suggested you do it. Like you write a test that fails. Well, in this case, I'm actually a little backwards because I'm doing the implementation ahead of what the test is saying. So I'm not technically doing this correctly, but I'm doing a cycle that is able to give me a feedback of this is wrong, this is right, and here's the differences. So it's a visual thing. So now if I run this, it's going to be a very different output because it's going to say body is not equal to all this stuff, which is what we expected. And so what I want the output to be is, how am I going to do this? I might have to pull these variables out to make the kind of the output string that I'm looking for. So I'm going to test like the literal actual output. And I'm going to say expected body. And I'm going to do this as a multi-line string. And I'm going to show you a kind of a trick in a minute. But this will be enough for now. Because I'm passing this in with just empty information. Which should get me close. The problem with this right now, the stock string. So even if I replace this thing and said expected body, it's not likely to succeed. And the reason being is that what I have up here on the left-hand side, the expected side, is different from what I have on the right-hand side. And actually, the assertion actually showed me uniquely why that is. And the reason being is this extra space. Where does that extra space come from? The extra space comes from literally the indentation right here. I'm using Python standard convention of spaces instead of tabs, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Tabs would have also showed up. But there are literally 8 spaces here. So that's not what we want. But at the same time, I don't want to do this. This is technically correct code, and it might even make the test pass. Or I'm still off by a little bit somewhere. Yeah, I put a couple new lines here, so maybe I didn't. Yeah. So this is really close, and that will pass. But look at this. This is I really hate this, and the reason I hate this is because it's aligned to this this left gutter over here. So there's a couple of ways that you can fix this, and I don't remember both of them offhand, but I do remember one of them. There, in the Python inspect module, is a method called, I think it's called cleandoc. Yeah, I think this is it. So what we're going to do is put this stuff back. So we know that the test was passing. So we know that what was over on our actual handler is similar to what was over here with just a difference of white space. So I'm going to import inspect, the inspect module, and then I'm going to wrap this doc string in clean doc. And what that should do, I hope, oh, it's very close. Something is just not quite right. What's different here? Trailing new line. Okay, so yeah, okay. Now what? So the left-hand side has a trailing, has no new line, and the right-hand side has a new line. Does that seem right? What's going on? The point I'm trying to make with this is that it will allow you to get a more indented block that will actually stick with your test. So for the next moment, I'm going to have to like fiddle with this output to make it match up. And then we'll actually fill in the stuff that's over here, added, modified, and deleted with what we care about, and put it in the test. And that should prove that the report that I want to send out is correct. So let's look at the test output again and try and figure out what's going on here. So the left-hand side, the side that I made with the clean doc, has 3 new line characters, 3 new line characters, and no new line at the end. Okay. The right-hand side has 3, 3, and then a new line. So it seems like I should be able to do this, but I'm afraid the clean doc might actually be messing with us here, because it's not, it's like trimming, it's trimming that enter. All right, what happens if I do this? Give it an extra space. So, sometimes code is fiddly. That's another lesson out of this, is you do what you can, but everything doesn't always work out. And, you know, I am willing to accept that clean doc might not be the right answer for this, and I'm willing to live with some crappier code if it means that I can get this done faster. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go back to the way we were a moment ago with this weird kind of like gutter situation, left gutter, and get it to pass. And I think I probably won't do it on the stream. I'm gonna, my goal here is to, just so you all are aware, I'm gonna finish this test, and I think that will be where it is, where I'll leave it at for the week, and you know, revisit what is the next thing. So, and I'll talk about what I have in mind, and if people have comments, they can, you know, tell me what they want to hear about. Okay, so we know that the test is passing, and so now I want to come up to the report, and I want to fill it in with the values. And we know that the structure of our statistics is a list for add, and we know that the things in that list are commonapptracker, which all have names. So what I'm really looking to do, I think, is to say, I might want to make this in 2 passes, but it doesn't matter. Let's just do the simplest thing that will work. So let's make added trackers. And I want my list to be, I'm going to use a list comprehension, and I'm going to go through the stats, and I'm going to get name out of, the common app tracker name, because I want the report to just list the names. That should be good enough to see what schools were added, because I can then go into the admin console in Django and search on the name or find the name pretty quickly. So I'm going to take the name and I'm going to say for common app tracker down here in stats, and this is the add category. Okay. So that's, now it correctly identified that I don't have the right variable anymore. And I did that on purpose because I wanted the list of names, and then to make the actual output, I'm going to do a join. And joins are a little funny in Python, but you actually take the string and you call join on it, and you pass it the list. Whereas other languages kind of flip that around, where you take a list and you call join on the actual thing that you'd want to join with. Python's a little strange in that regard. So I now have my added, and I think what this will do is it will mess up the output. So and I can see how I already don't like, or maybe that's just showing, nope, that looks good. So I want to say the added tracker is actually self common app factory create, and then we'll replace it with here, because that will make it easier to reference in my thing below, to say added tracker, and here I'm going to replace it with added tracker name. Let's make this a format string, or else that won't work. So something is different. So this is taking 3 new lines, and this side only has 2. So the actual expected output is giving 1 less. So really that's what it will be. Great. So now that I have this, I'm going to repeat the pattern for modified and deleted. And it's, I mean, I think literally I can take this and I can do a substitution on added to modified. And as long as I change the key to modify and delete that. And this is a bit of repetitive code, which some people might be bothered by, but it doesn't really have enough of an effect on here, because again, this is like a cheap sort of backend report, and this is an easy way to go. So we're going to change this to the modified tracker and change that to the modified tracker. And in our report, we're going to replace this with modified. Test still passes. Great. Okay. Final thing to check. We'll change modified to deleted. And we'll change the modify key to delete. Delete this. It's going to fail. Good. And I guess I should point out in this test, the benefit of Factory Boy. Notice that these are actual like fake names that are reasonable college names. Actually, Williams College might actually even be a real school name, not intentional. But if I just to kind of show it off for a second, let's go over and look at the factory that comes from this. So this factory, the way it works is it hooks up to the model, and when you want to designate variables that are required, you have to tell it how to define those. And I'm using this lazy attribute feature where I'm saying take, just call everything a college and fill it in with a placeholder value. And the thing that you're going to fill it in is using the very excellent Faker package. And Faker can just give you all sorts of stuff. And in this case, I'm getting a female last name here. And that's what I'm using as the college names. So that's why if you look at the output and you're like wondering, how is it changing every time? Like what's going on? Faker is doing randomized data for that benefit. And it gives something that's sort of representative of real life. So we have a modified tracker. We now need a deleted tracker. And we're going to do this. Copy. That's going to break because I didn't change it. What's going on here? Apparently this wants an extra new line. No. Oh, maybe it needs to be that. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So in summary, like this isn't the greatest test because I really don't like this style, and I wish I could remember the other standard library method that will kind of clean up doc strings like this and allow you to move stuff over. It's somewhere in there. I have to go search for it. I believe it's been mentioned many times on podcasts like Talk Python to Me or any of these excellent podcasts that really teach people how to use Python better. But I'm at a loss at the moment. So I feel pretty good about this. I think the handler is now doing everything that I expected it to. The raw schools that are coming in from the web scrape are checked against the existing schools in the database, and the statistics are collected about that. The thing that I had to pivot on midway is that we had to pull out stats because you don't want to attach state that's at module level to an instance, which is what I'm doing. I have a module level instance, and I just didn't want to have that conflict or that stale data stick around. So we collected all of our stats into a very primitive dictionary that is just a bunch of lists internally, and then passed that through the appropriate methods to track it, and then finally took that into the report method to send off the email. And as a reminder, we swapped out the email backend to use the local memory backend, which gives us access to this outbox thing. Now I'm curious, one thing we didn't check is, okay, those all work in there, but I don't know what will happen if the test checks with another email. So that's probably a problem that will bite me down the road. I'm okay with that. I think what I would end up doing probably is to take the test case class and maybe between each test clear out the outbox or something to that effect, so that I have this guarantee that what I run in an individual test will always just be the outbox of that particular test run. So I've kind of talked for quite a while. This is, you may be wondering, like, wow, we're so down in the weeds of what does this have to do with building a SaaS? And I think my answer to that is, sometimes y- there's a couple sides to building SaaS. There's the part that the user sees, which I have, and I will show off in a future episode, but this is just where I am today. And the part that the user sees is a bit more glamorous, perhaps. But in order to make the SaaS actually function and do the things that I expect it to do, and frankly have the value that I expect it to have for customers, I have to have the data in place to make that value. The real value of College Conductor ultimately is going to be, do I have the data about the schools? Have I been able to collect that in a novel and interesting way, such that someone who comes along will find that useful, to know which schools are participating in the common application versus the other kinds. They're called a universal application or the coalition application. Unless I have the backend processing that's doing that work for me, I'm just not adding any value to the world. So, we will get to some of the stuff of like, how did I, design all this? When I get actually into the app, of how does this work? What's the data that's in there? What are the schools, and what's presented, and all of that stuff. This is all stuff that that is the core part of the flow, but I think has to be secondary for the moment while I continue to add value. Because as you can see, what's in here is useful. It's the dates that I promise and say they're going to be there, and the schools that, what those applications are, and it has the very minimal necessary export information, but I really want to flesh out the tool to make it have more. And so that's what I think I'll be focusing on in future streams. I think where I am today in this stream is was all about this reporting stuff. What still needs to be done is still more back-end processing. The actual task itself is done, but today, if I deploy this to production, this code would never be called. So I need to actually do like switch hats and put on a DevOps hat. And the DevOps hat has me using Ansible, and the purpose of using doing some DevOps stuff is to hook up a tool that is essentially like a cron system. I use all of the tasks that get executed, and a task is just work that does not happen in the normal application. It's stuff that happens in a background worker, and the system that I'm doing that with is a third-party package called Celery, which is a great package. But Celery, in its default configuration, if you have just a worker, will only execute work when you directly tell it to. So that's when a view on the web page actually goes, and you click something and it says, okay, go do this work in the background. That's the normal flow. But Celery also has a tool in its toolbox called Celery Beat, and Celery Beat is this kind of cron tool that lets you run things on a schedule. So the final piece of getting this particular scanner going is actually hooking it into Celery Beat and setting it on a weekly cron schedule. So I don't know if that will happen in this stream or if I'll do that offline and then maybe like show it off. I don't know how exciting that would be to actually get the configuration going. But it's just another facet of when you're doing all this stuff yourself, unless you're using a platform as a service like Heroku that kind of manages some of these things for you. I don't even know if Heroku has kind of cron functionality, but you have to think about all of these pieces. And it's a lot. It's a lot to not only think about technology, but also the business aspects of SaaS. And so that's, I think, where I'll leave it for this evening. I didn't get any chat questions. That's fine. This is still my only my second stream. So hopefully what you were able to enjoy in this stream was a lot better audio quality. I made a big effort. My last one I listened to it and it sounded like, I was a million miles away, and it's very staticky. So it was hard to hear me. Hopefully that has changed, because what you see right out of frame, or what you don't see hopefully, is a microphone that is much better quality. So at least the audio will be better. I think If you have any thoughts on what you want to hear about, this is going to be exported to YouTube, and if you actually get all the way to the end and are here listening to me at this point, let me know in a comment, and I will try my best to address that stuff in a future stream. If you have any questions, I'm keeping this chat box widget open on the side. I didn't see anything today. No big deal. We're not really on the guts of Django stuff that you might have questions about yet, and it's still very early days. So with that, I'm going to call it a night. I appreciate all of the folks who came out, and I will see you at a future stream. Take care.